hopefully I didn't confuse anybody. But.
So is Abraham's bosom the equivalent for the Catholics as purgatory?
No, I just take it was just another name that he's using there for heaven. Because, see, going back to that parable, the rich man and Lazarus, a rich person like that, Jesus is telling that parable to a bunch of to Jewish leaders who are wealthy and who are very self-righteous. And so he tells them this parable about a rich man, and to them in their day, if you were rich and you were a Jew, you went to heaven. I mean, if you were a Jew, you went to heaven, especially if you were rich, because riches were a sign of God's favor. They had a real prosperity theology they had. So Jesus tells a parable, and here a rich Jew, and they believed that Abraham was standing at the gates of hell, and that if you were a Jew and you happened to wander down there accidentally, he was there to turn you back, and you couldn't go there, especially if you were a rich Jew. Well, now Jesus tells a parable where you got a rich Jew who goes to Hades and a poor beggar who goes to where? The bosom of Abraham. So that's why he calls it Abraham's bosom there. I think that to just kind of rub it into these guys a little bit worse even. You know, you're rich, and you think because you're rich and you're a Jew, you're going to go to heaven. Here's this poor man that's sitting out having his sores licked, which they think that's the worst. That guy's straight on his way to hell because he didn't have God's blessing. He said, not only is this poor guy going to come to heaven, he's lying there with his head on the bosom of Abraham. You know, the one that you think is going to turn you back, you know, when you get down there. So that's why I think in that parable specifically, he calls heaven Abraham's bosom there. So may raise more questions than it answered there, hopefully, but anyway. But a lot of people do take that two-compartment theory and all that you mentioned. There's certainly nothing wrong with that.
Yes, there are over 6 billion people in the world, and there are many religions. Right. The Catholic is one of the larger ones, Anglican Church, First Methodist, First Presbyterian,
sure.
And United Church of Christ. And homosexuality is a growing thing, and it's a sin. I call it a sin.
Sure.
But there's people are experiencing more acceptance. In fact, even in politics, you know, they also are Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses, and most of them, to my knowledge, don't teach the rapture.
That's right.
So I don't see how they can be saved, or maybe anyway, I believe in being born again and the rapture.
Amen. Well, yeah, that's a sad thing. You know, a lot of people who I consider to be believers, you know, who are born again, believe in the rapture and the Lord's coming, but they never talk about it. I mean, they might as well not believe in it. You know, they never talk about it. It's sad. Now, we don't want to go to the other extreme and get on a hobby horse and just talk about prophecy all the time. That's equally bad. You know, in churches, you know, all of us, we need to be balanced. We need to just talk about everything. But 28% of the Bible was prophecy at the time it was written. So if you teach the Bible, you're going to talk about prophecy. But that's the difficulty is people just kind of avoid it because, again, it's controversial. You know, it's like what I talked about tonight, you know, the different views on the rapture. Well, you can hold any of those views and be a born-again believer who loves the Lord. And I'm not going to argue with people or fight with them about it. But, you know, people will say, well, I don't want to talk about prophecy and the rapture because it's so controversial. Well, I would say if you're going to avoid talking about anything that's controversial, you can't preach on anything. You know, baptism's controversial. You know, the Lord's Supper's controversial. I mean, you know, there's people that have different views about everything. So to me, you just get up, you go through, you explain what you believe, why you believe it, and you know, we need to speak the truth, but we need to do it in love. And that goes to, you know, the issue of homosexuality. You mentioned all of those things. The two things we need more than anything today in the body of Christ and all of our own lives and in churches is we need truth and we need love. And if you got a bunch of truth but no love, you end up being hard and you know, people aren't attracted. But then if it's just all love, you know, a lot of churches, a lot of love, but there's no truth. J. Vernon McGee used to call that sloppy agape, you know, just everybody loves everybody, but they don't know anything. And that's difficult to do, but I think that's what we ought to pray for ourselves. I think that's what we ought to pray for our pastors, our leaders, is that we'll know the truth, we'll fearlessly proclaim the truth, but that we will be people of love as well. We'll really care about people. And I think if we can keep those things in balance, God will bless what we do.
I have two questions.
Yes.
I wanted to know if our pets would be raptured up
Okay.
with us.
All right.
And number two, when Jesus comes back and defeats the Antichrist and reigns for 1,000 years, are we who were raptured up, or is the church going to come back down and live on earth again?
Yes, I think when we are caught up, we're going to get caught up and be with him during the tribulation. When in heaven, we're going to be judged, the judgment seat of Christ. And then at the second coming, when this army is coming back with him, it says, that those who are coming back with him are clothed in fine linen, which is the righteous acts of the saints it speaks of in that passage. So we're going to be coming back with him to the earth, and we're going to reign with him for 1,000 years and then on into eternity. And we'll rule and reign on the earth. I believe we'll have positions of authority, based on our lives now. There's going to be rewards. Somebody will be the mayor, somebody will be the dog catcher. Because maybe if there's animals there. So, it's, the old saying is this is training time for reigning time, here now. But the question about animals in heaven, I was at a prophecy conference years ago. Have any of you heard of Dr. Walvoord, John Walvoord? You were talking earlier about how, you'd read some of my stuff. Well, everybody got their stuff from somebody else, Mark Bailey, who's president of Dallas Seminary, he says he's got a big place up on his shelf called Good Sermons I Stole from Other Thieves. And anyway, everybody learns stuff from everybody else. But Dr. Walvoord, he passed away 8 years ago, but he was really the dean of Bible prophecy. And I was at a conference that he was at years ago. He's probably in his 80s at the time. And a lady out in the congregation, out in the group, she said, I got a dog that I just love so much, and my dog died. And she said, I just want to know if my dog's going to be in heaven. Because he meant so much to me in my life. And, they had a bunch of other guys on the panel who were younger, and they all gave these long, theological kind of answers. Well, they came to Dr. Walvoord, and they said, well, Dr. Walvoord, everybody was waiting to hear what he would say about this. Said, what do you think about pets, being in heaven, people's pets? He sat there for a second, and he looked at the lady with real great tenderness, and he said, well, ma'am, he said, would it make heaven better for you if your dog's there with you? And she said, well, yes, it would. And he said, well, then he'll be there. That's a great answer, isn't it? And his point was, anything that makes our life better and more enriched and more full, that's what heaven's going to be. I do think there's evidence. You can look in Scripture. God made the animals. They're good. It talks about during the millennium, the lion's going to lay down with the lamb. there's going to be animals then. I don't see any reason why, and that's part of the beauty of creation that God's made. Now, is every, cow that, was, butchered for meat or whatever going to be raised in the future? I don't know. But, animals that people loved, I don't see a reason to see any problem with that. Yes?
I know y'all are going to touch on that this weekend, but I was just wondering, can you tell us when we believers are going to be judged?
Yeah, I think it's going to be during the time after we're raptured to heaven. So I think we're going to be caught up to heaven, and then at the Lord's coming, it says in 1 Corinthians 4:5, it says when the Lord comes, it says don't go on judging before the time, for when the Lord comes, we're going to all have to stand there before him. So I take it's during that time of while the tribulation's going on earth, we're going to be judged, which that's another reason why I believe in pre-trib rapture, because when the saints come back with Christ at the second coming, we've already been rewarded, because we have the linen on, the righteous acts of the saints. If we just go up and meet him and come right back down, the post-trib view, when did we get rewarded? So it has to happen during that time. So I think we'll be caught up, we'll be rewarded and judged during that time, during that period of time. And that's one of my favorite messages. I'm going to bring that over at the conference. I call it How to Get Ready for the Judgment Seat of Christ. And it's it's a sobering thing, but it's an exciting thing to think about ahead of time. And on Sunday, by the way, just to mention too, I think on Sunday here I'm going to do just kind of a message of just a lot of the things that are happening in our world, kind of signs of the times, events that are taking place. But this is an important thing, and I'll probably mention this in that message too. I'll probably repeat myself, but think about this. All the signs of the times are signs of the second coming. There aren't any signs for the rapture. So see, all the signs that we see in our world are signs of the second coming. And it's the old saying, if you can already see the lights of lights of Christmas, then Thanksgiving must be pretty close. And that's the way it is with the rapture. If we can already see the signs of the second coming, then how close must the rapture be? So I'll be talking about some of the things we just see in our world that are, you know, really dramatic, and a lot of them you know about. We'll look at some of those things together. So, does anybody else have anything, or do we need to? Okay, no, that's great. I'm fine with it. I just don't want to wear everybody out. People start sneaking out the back door. Yeah.
Here you go. You want to ask? I was going to proxy this for my mom, but she said she'll ask it.
Oh, okay, good.
This often, I often wondered about this question.
Okay.
Is it true that our last breath on earth will be our first breath in heaven? Is that when we go to the Bema seat to face Jesus?
Well, the way I would see it is whenever a person dies here on earth, as we looked at earlier, their body, you know, falls asleep, and immediately their spirit, the immaterial part, goes to be with the Lord. And then as we saw at the rapture, he's going to bring with him, you know, the immaterial part, and the body's going to get raised, and it's going to be put back together. And then that's when I think we're going to appear before the Lord at the judgment seat. It's at the rapture. It's after the rapture. That way, that's when everybody, the living believers in the church age, will have been caught up. The dead will have been rejoined. That's when we'll all be there. And then I think that's when the judgment seat's going to take place. Some have the idea that, you know, at the moment each believer dies, you know, because we'll often say about someone, you know, well, so-and-so died, you know, he's gone on to the judgment, yeah, you know, to meet the Lord or whatever. And we're with the Lord, but I don't think the judgment takes place till the rapture of the church. That's the way I see it. Now, I think when if a person died 200 years ago, and you know they've been there all that time. I mean, time's going to go real quick in heaven. You know, I don't think heaven's timeless. I often hear people say that. Well, we won't have any consciousness of time in heaven. I don't think that's true, because it talks about in Revelation chapter 8. It says there was silence in heaven for about 30 minutes, and which is an interesting statement to make. But it seems like there's some consciousness of the passage of time. Also, like in Revelation 6, there's a group of people there who've been martyred. They've been killed for their faith. And they look at the Lord and they say, Lord, how long is it going to be until you're going to, you know, take vengeance for us, you know, for those who martyred us? So they seem to have a sense of time there in heaven. So, but I think it'll go quicker. You know how it is when something's going good, time goes faster, and when it's bad, it's slower. So I think it'll go quicker, but I think we'll still have a consciousness of the passage of events. So I think, you know, after the rapture, that's when everybody's going to be gathered there for the judgment seat of Christ. But we'll talk more about that on on Saturday afternoon. I think someone's speaking on that topic. So yes, there's someone back there in the back there. You can just say it real loud if you want. Okay.
Can you explain the different levels of heaven?
The levels of heaven? Oh, okay, about how I mentioned the third heaven a minute ago. Yeah, there is no seventh heaven. You know, we talk about that. You know, the Jews had ideas of, you know, like 7 heavens or 9, or people have had different ideas. In the Bible, it speaks of the third heaven. You know, Paul says, I was caught up to paradise, and he says that's the third heaven. So we know there that the third heaven is where God exists. It's outside time, space, matter. The first 2 heavens, like the first heaven would be the atmosphere of our earth. Because you'll often talk about, you know, the birds fly up in the heavens. Well, obviously, it's not talking about out in outer space. It's our atmosphere. The second heaven would be outer space, which, again, when you think about that, space is expanding at 186,000 miles per second, the universe is. Which I always think of myself, well, what's out there? You know, what's it expanding into? I mean, think about that. So that's the second heaven. So you could call it the atmospheric heaven, is heaven number 1. The stellar heaven, where the stars are and outer space. But the third heaven is where God exists, which is outside this time, space, matter continuum. I mean, there's a sense in which I think where God exists, and, you know, there's an invisible warfare going on around us of angelic beings. I mean, there's a sense in which it's as far away from us as it could ever be, but there's another sense in which it's right here. I mean, you know, when a person dies, they leave this, you know, time, space continuum, and they go to that other dimension or whatever, if you will. But those are the 3 heavens the Bible speaks of. You know, birds fly in one heaven, and, you know, David says, you know, I consider the heavens, you know, your handiwork, and the third heaven's where God is.